A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, by careful design, the evil Darth Sidious enacted Order 66. Anakin Skywalker led clone troopers into the Jedi Temple, executing everyone. However, not all the Jedi and their students perished. A few survived. Some continued to fight against the Empire, while others ran and hid. Anakin Skywalker, now known as Darth Vader, placed a large bounty on the head of any discovered Jedi. Though a great risk, any bounty hunter would try to collect on a discovered rogue Jedi. This is the story of one Padawan, and how he was forced to face his fate. Prologue. Alone. Echoes of screaming children rang in Ashi's ears. Last night's dream was the darkest he experienced in years. The lingering memory of that horrible day taunted his unconscious mind. This was one of the reasons he spent so much time in meditation each afternoon. The arid plains of Jahala were filled with the sweet aroma of grains. The summer sun blazed above and warmed the ground. The dried grasses waved gently in the breezes. Ashi strolled through the fields as he made his way toward the place he would sit. In the distance he could see the people like him going about their daily routines, farming the fields and tending to the cattle. It was a simple life, one he envied. These were his people, the Jahalans, a race of cat-like humanoids. They weren't technologically brilliant or space warriors. They were farmers. In fact, Ashi may be the only person alive among the Jahalans today to have left the planet. Ashi was around 5 feet tall, with golden brown fur covering his body. Around his head grew a majestic mane of darker brown. Behind him, a long tail swung as he walked. He had a dark nose, a puffy muzzled face, and slit-pupil eyes. His ears were higher up on his head and stuck out from the mane. He wore no shirt, only utility pants. He was a typical Jahalan male, except for his unique connection to the Force. "Ashi! Ashi!" 2 children ran up to him, their tails flipping around as they bounded through the high grasses. He smiled at them. "What is it?" "Can you do it again? Can you make me fly?" The little girl bounced up and down with excitement. Ashi shook his head. "No, Taka, I won't. I was in deep meditation before and lifted you by mistake instead of that rock. Using the Force isn't for playing." "Aw, please." No. Now, go back to your homes. I'm going to sit by the waters again." The girl got a rather sneaky smile. "Gonna meditate again?" "Yes, but I'm not using the Force this time. Only mental exercises." He knew what she wanted. Without another word, the 2 children ran off in search of the next thing to entertain them. Ashi laughed. He wasn't ever offended by their ignorance about the Force. There hadn't ever been a Jedi among the Jahalans before. Ashi walked on toward a set of low hills that crept up toward the mountains in the distance. These hills had a river that cut through them. Cold Day Waterfall was a particular favorite place of Ashi's. The flow of the water over him drowned out everything and helped Ashi focus his thoughts on pure meditation. The waterfall was surrounded by tall, thin trees with sparse foliage on their branches. It fell into a pool that drained at its base into the water table below. Ashi stopped at the edge, took off his pants, and put a single clawed foot into the waters. There was a good reason why it was called Cold Day. It made his fur bristle every time. After he was acclimated to the chilly temperature, he stepped deeper into it until he was directly under the flowing falls. He had previously moved a large boulder into place and used it to sit cross-legged under the flow. "See the candle of the mind. Focus on the flame," he said to himself. In his mind he envisioned a candle burning in pure darkness. "The light banishes the darkness, the even light of peace." He repeated the words of his former master. "I will focus on the light, not the dark. I will keep it lit. My breath will not extinguish the light." His breathing became soft and steady to keep the flame from flickering. He continued this steady, focused breathing. The candle was his sole thought. After a while he changed his focus. "The darkness will lift. I will see the universe. I will touch the Force." With his eyes still closed, the image of the candle remained, but instead of darkness, he saw outer space. He could see the planet beneath him, and the stars in the distance. He could feel the presence of starships passing through the system, their passengers and workers as shadows against the force. A complacent smile graced his feline muzzle, his whiskers standing up a little taller. At this time, no one was coming toward the planet. He always worried about raiders coming to pillage the defenseless world of simple farmers. Few marauders even cared to notice them, and that was fine by him. Suddenly, he felt something, a straining feeling in him. He knew it well. It was the echo of the Jedi who were massacred 10 years ago at the temple. He could sense the few out there who survived, who now struggled against the imbalance in the Force. Darkness has spread deep across this new empire. The candle in his vision flickered, and the flame became erratic. With a great thrust of his own spirit, he forced himself out of this deep meditation. He opened his eyes and took a few breaths to gather himself after that. It took a moment to focus on the reality around him. Why is this happening? He muttered to no one. His time in meditation has become tainted more and more by this dark sensation around him. Once again he closed his eyes and saw that candle in the darkness. This time, though, he did not reach out into the Force. He merely settled his mind and spirit on the calming meditation. He couldn't bear the pain. He couldn't stand the shame in him of what he had done those 10 years ago. Star Wars, Ashi's Shame. Chapter 1, Protector of Home. Ashi enjoyed a meat turnover for breakfast as he walked through the meager home he lived in. "Morning, R1." He nudged an old droid that had not yet activated today. R177 beeped and whistled as its systems all came online. It was rusted, dented, and had seen more time active than any of the old R1 series. However, it was all Ashi had. There weren't many droids this far out. R1 bounced back and forth on its two stubby legs and beeped loudly. Ashi stopped eating and gave the droid a surprised look. "Are you sure?" R1 stopped and checked its readings, and then projected a hologram of a ship. It was a small, fast class of ship often used by raiders in the far-reach sector of space. Ashi became angry. "Why didn't you wake me? That ship entered orbit 5 hours ago. It's probably landed already." R1 beeped shrilly at Ashi. Okay, I know, you're old. No time to argue. Let's move." He put his breakfast on a table and picked up a pair of swords from the corner. He dashed out of the door with R1 following. While Ashi ran for the village to make sure no one got hurt by the attackers, R1 went to their ship and activated the cloaking shield so it would not be detected. It would be horrible if anyone discovered one of the old Jedi spacecraft here. Ashi picked up speed when he heard the distant sound of children screaming. He skidded in the dirt as he reached the main road to the village. To his horror, he found 2 Jahalan fighters dead on the ground and villagers running around in a panic. 5 green-skinned men grabbed children and shot at the defenders of the village. These weren't your average raiders. They were slavers, coming to get stock. "Damn," Ashi whispered. There were 5. It was hard enough fighting the normal 2 or 3, but 5 would tax his ability to fight without revealing his hidden talent. He pointed a metal sword at the slavers. "Stand down! Release those children!" The Rhodian raiders snickered and then pointed weapons right back at him. One fired, but Ashi was quicker with the Force and sidestepped the blast. He lowered himself and rushed at the 5. Instinctively, he let out a ferocious roar to startle them. More than once they shot at him, but he carefully moved so to avoid the blast. They thought they simply had poor aim. They didn't realize he could sense their actions before they took them. Upon reaching the 5, he launched himself into the air and swung both blades down, slicing the head off of the nearest Rhodian. They stopped their attack and jumped back when they saw their captain in pieces. These Rhodians presumed farmers were easy targets. Ashi, who did not enjoy killing, also stopped. He pointed his blade at them. "I warned you. Put those children down and leave, or you will end up dead as well." 3 held children with one arm. The 4th took up 2 guns and shot at Ashi. In response, he deflected the blaster shots with his swords. He spun his whole body around as he reacted to the weapon's fire. He got close enough to stab the Rhodian in the gut. It was not fatal, but it did stop him. You move like Jedi, furry man!" The Rhodian fell to the ground and held his green blood-stained side. Ashi smiled and held out his swords threateningly at the others. I'm no Jedi, just a trained warrior. Put our children down and leave. The Rodian yelled something at his men in their native tongue, and they each put their blasters to the heads of the children they carried. Then he stood up, still holding his side with one hand. With the other, he pointed his gun at Ashi. No kill you, maybe. But you let us go, or children die. Ashi heard several of the parents scream in horror at the sight. More of the other Jahalan defenders prepared to fight, but they were no match for these raiders. Only Ashi could save this day. To the dismay of his own people, Ashi dropped his swords. He could sense the ego of the Rodians growing. They were about to execute him and take the children. He said, I have seen too many children die. I have witnessed too much evil and not fought back. I won't let it happen again. Not today. Suddenly the guns in their hands flew away and tumbled across the ground. Ashi looked up with vengeance in his eyes. He summoned the force, and the arrogant Rodian, without a hostage, flew backwards through a wall. The other three dropped their captives and scurried away. It's a Jedi! One screamed. Ashi twisted his body around and thrust his hand out, sending a wall of force at the fleeing raiders. They were lifted and thrown through the air, smashing into buildings and ultimately perishing in the dusty streets. The first one he threw into a building weakly reached over and retrieved a fallen gun. Ashi saw this and quickly reacted by running straight for the man. He put his hands down, and both swords flew across the ground into his palms. With a quick strike, he buried the sword in the Rodian's chest, pinning him to the ground. Instantly the crowds of Jahalans began to cheer. A few ran out and took up their crying children. Others wept by the side of their fallen friends. However, most rushed out to thank their protector. Ashi quickly pulled out his blades and cleaned the green blood off of them. Thank you! The chief exclaimed as he patted Ashi on the shoulder. Ashi didn't seem as happy as the others. He never liked taking lives. Please, have the bodies removed and burned. It isn't good to have dead men here for our children to see. Ashi said this solemnly. Of course! The chief pointed to a pair of village defenders and went to tell them what to do. The village was ready to celebrate the victory, but Ashi knew he had one more task. These men had a ship, and it could have a tracking system that would lead others here. He would need to find it, turn it off. But suddenly he heard the sound of engines. In the distance, the Rodian ship lifted off the ground, quickly heading for space. Ashi wasn't relieved to see it go. There was worry in his eyes. Ashi, come! You should have something to eat! The chief pulled on Ashi's shoulder. Ashi bowed his head to him. Thank you, but I must get back to R1 and scan for invaders. Oh, I see. Are you worried they will come back to capture our children again? Ashi shook his head. Not today. But now that they know I'm here, this could be a problem. Do you need help? We could... No, thank you. Ashi interrupted him. Keep an eye on everything here, and I will see to R1. There is a good chance they don't know anything, just that their men all died in an attempted kidnapping. I will go check sensors and make sure everyone is safe. With that, he left the chief of the village to deal with the grieving people. Ashi headed back to his home, a worry in his eyes that betrayed his words of comfort. He knew what would happen to his world if the truth of his identity came out. Star Wars, Ashi's Shame. Chapter 2, Drac. Devonport stunk. In fact, the whole planet of Kellic stunk, but it wasn't a place for the refined of society to enjoy. Raiders came here to peddle their stolen goods and sell any slaves they were able to capture. It was an illegal practice, but being so far away from Coruscant provided some cover. The only Imperial outpost here was a small listening station used to maintain communications and holo traffic into the far-reach sectors. There were just enough troopers to protect the outpost, not to police the streets. Drac pushed his way through the crowds, past the vendors, and right by several of his favorite bars and brothels. More than one prostitute grabbed his arm, but was met by a shove from the angry Rodian. He didn't want any pleasure right now, just revenge. Drac! Drac! A former captain of the fallen Trade Federation yelled. Drac snarled. What is it, Movek? The finely dressed man pulled Drac aside. I hear your ship was out in the far reach again. Searching for merchandise? I have a buyer for any girls you may have picked up. The greedy old man was eager for fresh slaves to sell to his hut buyers. Drac growled. My men are all dead. Dead? Did you go after a target you couldn't beat? Movek snickered at Drac. I don't want to talk about it. Drac looked back at the tallest building in Devonport. Is Commander Nellis here? I did see her ship arrive yesterday. She should be in her office. Why bother filing a report? Movek asked. You can't tell them what you were doing out there, and besides, the Empire technically doesn't own the territories in the Far Reach. It's not a report. I have a bounty to collect. Drac shoved several people aside and continued toward the Imperial offices. Movek was puzzled. Bounty? In the Far Reach? Commander Nellis looked over several reports from her officers. She was only gone for 3 days, and already the paperwork had backed up. She continued to remind herself why she was doing this. She loved the Empire, and the job was good. She even got a bonus for having to work in such a distant location. Eventually, when she lived comfortably in retirement, all this would be worth it. Pressing a button on her desk, she said, Trooper 423, tell the infirmary to send their chief medical droid to my office at once. Yes, ma'am, was the junior officer's response. Nellis looked over the reports 5 times, trying to find out who had started charging the locals for visits to the infirmary here. One of the benefits to all citizens of the Empire is medical care at any base, so long as you don't mind being treated by droids. Someone reprogrammed the droids to ask for money, and she would put a stop to that. Just then, Trooper 423 came back to the comm. Ma'am, you have a visitor. She muttered, that droid was fast. Then she said aloud, send him in. The door of her office opened, and she looked up, expecting to see the standard med droid, only to find a dirty Rodian with an ugly snarl on his green snout. Commander Nellis frowned at him. Can I help you? I think we can help each other, Drac said. Nellis rolled her eyes and shooed him with a waving hand. I'm not going to purchase any drugs or prostitutes from you. No. I'm not here to sell. I'm here to collect on a bounty, one you'll be interested in. Drac stepped a bit closer to her desk. Nellis kept her finger on the call button for her security, in case this Rodian got any funny ideas. A bounty? The head of planetary security deals with the criminal bounties. This is no smuggler or slave trader. Drac stood right in front of her desk, the shaft of light fully illuminating him. This is a Jedi. This caught her by surprise. A Jedi? There hasn't been a reported Jedi in any sectors around here for 5 years. He was well hidden. I watched him with my own eyes cut down 5 of my best men. He used the Force to protect a pathetic little village in the Far Reach. I promise, Commander, this is no false report. I want the bounty. In exchange, I'll give you the location. Nellis took a moment to study this man. If I believed you, which I can't say that I do, I can't hand over that kind of bounty without actual proofs. You give me a location. If a Jedi is found, you'll be rewarded. Otherwise, you'll be thrown in jail for making a false report. Fine. I'll give you the location. When you find him, you pay me. Drac slammed a fist on her desk. He killed my crew. I deserve payment. The commander stood up and pressed the button on the desk. The door opened, and her chief security trooper came in. Go with Trooper 423 and file an official report. I'll make sure you get the reward if this is legitimate. It is, Drac grunted as he left her office. Nellis was glad to be rid of that man. More than one officer in the Outer Rim has had to deal with false Jedi reports. The bounty on a captured or killed Jedi is so high that it attracts many greedy men. Unfortunately, the filing of a false report for a Jedi sighting is met with demotion, and sometimes termination. The last thing she wanted was to be demoted for that, considering this kind of demotion was dealt with by Lord Vader.